So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged, and it feels like this has been a long time coming, doesn't it? Because this is going to be the first that I have shown from any work that's been going on the next patch of the game, and the fact that they feel ready enough to share a replay with me lets me believe at the very least that we're closer to release than we have been for a long time. So, the new patch of the game. Now, I've been mentioning this on and off as part of my battle replays for quite some time at this point. This is still very much a work in progress. You can obviously see based on the textures of this settlement that it isn't completely finished just yet, but mechanically everything at the very least is in place. And we're going to be seeing some of the more obvious changes that the next patch is going to be introducing, including this is the main settlement of one of the new factions that has been added to the game at this point. But one of the more interesting things for me at the very least is going to be how the balance of the game shifts almost completely, I would suggest, given the fact that there's going to be a lot of mechanics that are going to be undergoing some pretty big changes, including the over-reliance on stuff like rangers for defenders, the fact that cavalry is going to have a bit of an overhaul as well, the new ways in which infantry is going to be interacting with one another, because I have been mentioning at this point that for me the game has gotten a little bit stale at the very least, because I feel like I've kind of seen everything from the old patch that has been going on up until this point. So now we're going to be seeing a bit of a breath of fresh air, really. I think this is going to be more than anything else. Now, I don't know, based on the new patch has been undergoing development for so long at this point that ideas have come and gone, so I don't know which ones have survived and which ones have perished at this point in time. So this is going to be as much of a discovery for me as it is for everyone watching, and we'll be digging into a lot of the more mechanical changes, I'm sure, as the new patch gets close to the general release and some of the aspects of it are tidied up a little bit more. But for the time being, this is going to just be an initial preview into what the new patch is going to have involved in it. They're rather interesting texture glitches, I must say. It's almost like a mixture of the wall textures from Minas Tirith also combined with the standard Medieval 2 ones. But even so, regardless, we will be moving on to having a look at the army compositions, and we're actually going to break with tradition a little bit, and we're going to look at the defenders first and foremost, because this is going to be the Rhovanion. Now, having a look at the Rhovanion in terms of what they are stylistically, maybe the best thing to describe them as would be kind of the Dunland of the East, in the sense that they're a little bit more tribal, a little bit more wild and savage than the other factions that are around that part of the world, namely Dale. Even Rhûn are perhaps going to be a little bit more civilized perhaps than the wild folk in the Rhovanion. Now, some aspects of the Rhovanion roster might be a little bit controversial, and we'll get onto those in just a moment, but many of them perhaps not. We have the Rhovanion archers over here, a heavier archer you can see, donning a little bit more armour than some of the other units, which we'll get onto in just a moment. Again, be interesting to see how archers interact with one another now. I've always been of the opinion that heavier archers like this should be able to more comfortably deal with lower end archers in a pure skirmish fight, because one of the things attackers have always been able to do with reckless abandon really is simply throw low tier archers in and always get good value off. Now, that is one way you should be able to use them, but it shouldn't be so easy to do so, I think, and heavy archers should be a way in which you can counter that. So I'll be interested to see how the Rhovanion archers here manage to deal with any of the... Apologies for that, but in my haste I realised I hadn't actually allowed the attackers to spawn in so we could actually have a look at them afterwards. But as I was saying, I will be interested to see how the Rhovanion archers manage to deal with the men of the East in this situation, because they of course have got more numerous low-end archers which could perhaps be involved in a bit more of a skirmish. So as we head back out to the outer reaches of the settlement now, up on the walls where the archers used to stand, we have some tribal levy spears. So this is going to be one of the things which I do think sets the Rhovanion apart a little bit from the other, I guess, good aligned kingdoms of men, because that is what the Rhovanion technically are. The tribal levy spears are going to represent maybe something that you'd expect to find more so in Harad or Dunland, or Rudauer even, a sort of low tier, very lightly armoured spear unit, which is not going to be up to much individually in melee, but do offer you a very numerous unit that you can use to block cavalry or just gum up the works a little bit in choke point fighting, which is going to be very important in a battle like this, of course, in a more elongated siege situation. So a couple of tribal levy spears there. Eclipse 2500, I believe it's Sin of the Dark Cloud and Add in Men are all going to be on the defence, by the way. Rhovanion phalanx, so the Rhovanion units clearly are the slightly heavier units, which the Kingdom of the Rhovanion have access to with regards to their mainline infantry units. So having access to a decently armoured unit of pikes, in addition to having a bit of a shield as well, not too dissimilar from the sort of thing which Rudar have against, so perhaps Rudar or another faction which you can compare the Rhovanion to with some success. Definitely a lot of crossover there. But a unit like this, heavy pikes, they're not really going to change too much mechanically regardless of what you do with them. The only way that you can change them, I guess, would be to reinstitute the secondary weapon functionality which standard Medieval 2 had, but that made pikes significantly less effective than they are in Reforged, to the point where, well, or any of the submods really for Med 2. So I'm kind of glad that that isn't going to be the case, at least I assume so. The Rovakin phalanx are going to be very important for this battle moving forward, of course. In any sort of siege battle, pikes are going to be a very useful tool for both attackers and defenders, but a more important one perhaps for defenders to use correctly. Tribal Levy Slingers, we have already encountered Slingers over in Silmarillion, so they're going to be very similar here. Lower base damage, but having armour piercing, they can be surprisingly savage with regards to the damage they can deal. As with other Tribal Levy units, though, you only have to look at them to realise their armour value is not going to be particularly high, going to be more easily cut down in melee by more professional soldiers. We also have some Tribal Levy Skirmishers over here, which are going to be more traditional Javelin men. So again, when it comes to trying to hold on to choke points, ways in which you can deal damage in a siege, always going to be throwing projectiles, so Slingers and Javelins. Again, more of those tribal aspects of the Rhovanion shining through here, but when it comes to mucking in melee, they're definitely going to be more reliant on their Rovakin units than their Tribal Levies, as we have seen thus far. We do have some Tribal Berserkers back here, which are going to be more of a melee-focused unit. You can see that they're wielding a deadly Falx sword, so it's going to be interesting to see how much damage they can deal. Now, with regards to armour piercing and the like, this is the sort of thing which we'll do a deeper dive into at a later date when things are a little bit more set in stone. But of course, shock infantry units like this are going to be good at dealing damage very quickly, and against the Men of the East don't have the highest defensive values around, so a unit like this is going to be useful at dealing damage quickly, but they themselves, as with the other tribal units that we've seen so far, are naturally going to have lower defensive values, so they're going to have to be on the lookout for that, and hopefully keep them out of harm's way of any attacking archers they may perceive. Adin Men has got some Tribal Levy Spears and some Tribal Levy Slingers, so these more numerous units are going to be actually very useful for covering a settlement this large. Having more numerous units when you're on the defence is always a bit of a boon. Some Rovakin Archers once again, another unit of Rovakin Phalanx, more Tribal Levy Spears, and more of the more similar units. Rovakin Hoplons, so a unit of heavy spears. As we've seen already, they've got the Tribal Levies, but if you want something a little bit more professional, a little bit more defensible as well, which spears do have a tendency to be, then this unit of Hoplons is going to be very, very useful for you. Don't know how useful they're going to be up on the walls if the armour piercing of Rhûn get their hooks into them quickly. Obviously, one of the standout features you can already see from them is the fact they're more heavily armoured than the tribal units. You don't want to be giving Rhûn the opportunity to use their armour piercing to good effect, but still, they're going to be stacking up in and around this gatehouse and stopping Rhûn's progress potentially. Tribal Levy Spears, more Rovakin Phalanx, so definitely you've got a bit of a theme going on here. Rovakin Archers, I would imagine the Rhovanion are not a faction with a particularly huge roster, mainly because there is a more limited space now for actually adding new factions to the game. So I imagine you're going to be seeing a kind of similar spread of units to what you would see from a faction like Rhôvanion, for example. Tribal Levy Slingers once again. We'll be getting on to one of the more controversial additions, I think, to the Rhovanion in just a second, with a couple of units of Berserkers here. Here they are, though, the Tribal Sabertooth Riders. Now, in terms of style, they're not all that dissimilar, I think, to the War Beasts of Harad, in the sense that they ride those rather large rhinos. I don't know how people are going to feel about big Sabertooth Tigers being the mount of choice for these tribal men of the Rhovanion, but even so, I would imagine that the War Beasts are probably the best point of comparison for this unit, in the sense that they're probably going to be able to deal tons of damage off the charge. I don't know how survivable they're going to be in melee against other cavalry, but certainly their armour value is going to be pretty low. Their multiple HP status is also in question, but interesting to see how the Rhovanion cavalry does get on, because it's not just these tribal cavalry units that they have, and I think the other unit is going to be more universally appreciated by everyone, whereas that one, we'll see. I mean, I personally don't mind them, but people do have strong opinions about such things. Rhovanion Ballista in position, and you can see that the Ballista crew is also a little bit more useful now, so perhaps something which encourages people to take artillery a little bit more often is the fact that the crew themselves are now going to be a little bit more useful. Again, a feature we've seen a little bit more so in Silmarillion, slightly in the last patch of Reforged as well with regards to the Gondorian Trebuchet crew. But yeah, the Rhovanion Ballista crew also doubles as a unit of Rovakin Hoplons in melee, so there is that. The Rovakin Nobles, which are going to be one of the bodyguard units for the Rhovanion, obviously a very heavy unit of sword and board bodyguards. Very nice looking as well. I do like the sort of leopard pelts that they wear. It gives them a slightly, I don't know, it's a weird mix of sort of Indian, almost African vibes that the Rhovanion have, in addition to having a slightly similar style as well to maybe Rhôvanion is the closest approximation. But the Rovakin Nobles, again, maybe not the most thrilling bodyguard unit ever, being that they're just a sword and shield unit. They look fantastic. We have got some more tribal levy skirmishers, a couple more units of them, more hoplons. We've got the phalanx as well. Up on the walls we've already seen this unit of archers, another unit of phalanx. As we get into the main square we have another ballista, this one from Sin, more tribal levy skirmishers. Rovakin nobles, 2 units of them, from Eclipse and from Sin, guarding the main palace of the Rovakin Lord. We have got some tribal berserkers, so yeah, we can see the extent really of the Rhovanion roster being laid bare here. We've got some Rovakin archers, some pikes, some more hoplons. There is another unit which I know we're going to see in just a moment, which is another unit of cavalry, tribal levy spears once more. And then defending the western gate we have more Rovakin nobles from Tundra's Fox. So actually there's 4 defenders, so it is a 4v4 tribal levy slingers. Here we are. This is the more traditional lance cavalry, or at least one of them. We have the Rhovanion nobles, so this is the mounted bodyguard they have. You can see the winged hussar-like addition to the standard style of Rovakin noble, which is on foot. And we also have the Rhovanion lancers as well, so definitely a hussar-like feel to them. Hopefully they have a charge bonus to match their real-life counterparts. Interesting to see how strong this Rhovanion cavalry actually is, and interesting to see actually how especially the lancers perform, because they're going to be a single HP unit of cavalry, so I'm going to be keeping an eye on how well they can do in this particular situation. Tribal cavalry are also here, a unit of mounted javelins, always going to be useful for trying to scythe through enemy cavalry. We'll see if the attackers have brought any cavalry of their own. Tribal levy skirmishers, slingers, and I imagine we're going to be seeing very much a similar sort of thing we've already seen. Tribal berserkers, hoplons, slingers, yeah, more slingers, so plenty of interesting units. They do remind me of Rhôvanion in the sense they are very keenly split between clearly the upper echelons of Rhovanion society and then the more tribal underlings. The split between the perhaps more western view of warfare, in the sense you've got those heavier units, the more stock-still approach to battles, and then rather than Rhôvanion, which twin that with maybe more of a woodland realm Lothlorien elven edge, they instead twin it with more of a Rudauer Harad tribal fighter edge. So it's going to be interesting to see. The numbers will definitely help them in a settlement this vast though, and in a 4v4 they should be a little bit more well equipped to deal with any onslaughts. But we'll go through the attackers now, which should take a little bit less time because we've already seen these factions before, of course, mainly led by the Easterlings of Rhûn. DF Marker's got some Gamprim, some Halberdiers, which will be useful against some of the more heavily armoured units, particularly against something like the Hoplons that we've seen. We do have some Dragon Knights as well. The Dragon Knights definitely have a heavier look to them, the runic cataphracts, than any of the cavalry really that the Rhovanion are capable of fielding, but I don't know, the Rhovanion cavalry strikes me as the sort which is going to be better at charging into the enemy and then quickly beating a hasty retreat, again, not unlike the cavalry that Harad have available to them. Eastron crossbowmen, something which the Rhovanion don't have access to as a unit of crossbows. We've seen how strong crossbows have been in the past. I don't think that's going to change too much here, because I think it's baked into Medieval 2 at its base for the crossbows to be that way inclined, but you never know. With the balance changes that are naturally going to be a part of this battle, I will also be keeping an eye on how savage the crossbows are if and when they get into position to rain down bolts upon the enemy. More Gamprim. We've got the Flagrim as well, which is a good choice, as we've already said. The Rovakin units, particularly the Spears, which are going to be more defensively inclined, probably won't match up too well to the Flagrim, and the Rhovanion will have to rely on other things like their Berserkers and maybe their ranged units to deal with such units. Khamul's Shadow Guard pushing up around, more armor piercing. We have the Khamul's Immortals, which is a new unit for Rhûn, which is rather intriguing. A dual wielding unit. Maybe this is intended to be more of a replacement for the Easterlings warriors, which were rarely used. So this is probably going to be, I don't know really. I mean, Khamul's Immortals makes them sound very impressive, but a unit of 228 men would imply that they're a lower end unit? I don't know. I mean, we're going to see how well they do, I suppose. They should actually be really good against the tribal levy units, given that they are a dual wielding unit. Balkoth tribesmen, we've got the Dragon's Wrath crossbows, who I think have been completely overhauled in the sense they're no longer a body piercing crossbow, because they do have 103 men in the unit for a start, so they could just be a higher end unit of crossbows. We shall have to wait and see how they perform. Scion Rim aren't going to have changed too much. I mean, heavy spears, there isn't really many bells or whistles on such a unit anyway. Khamul's Chosen, who have undergone a little bit of a change as well. I have to say, I really like the style change to the Khamul's Chosen. They were always a pretty good looking unit, but now they look a little bit more sinister and a little bit more regal as well. Very, very nice. Low Flag Rim, we have the Dragon's Breath Artillery, which of course doesn't have that much ammunition, but it knocks down walls instantaneously, which is why Marcus clearly brought it. Crossbows, Flag Rim, Scion Rim, and then another unit of tribesmen at the back, a nice little lake over there. Now then, Kuro, who is playing also as the Easterlings of Rhûn, he has some Dragon's Wrath crossbows. We have some Narim. That's something I was interested to see, actually. Not too much in the way of archer action from Mark's army. That isn't the case here with Kuro, though. He's already going to be unloading with the Narim upon the walls of the Rhovanion. We have some Scion Rim 2 acting as the front line. Plenty of units of Flag Rim as well. Very good at dealing with those higher end units. Easteron Crossbowman. Another unit of the fantastic looking Khamul's Chosen, I have to say. Very nice. Plenty of Khamul's Immortals. We'll be keeping an eye on how well they can do in this situation as well. Another Dragon's Breath Cannon, so plenty of fire going to be raining down on this settlement. Khamul's Dragon Knights, and this is also going to be something of a new unit for Rhûn as well. Something which perhaps I was a little bit surprised they never had was a unit of cavalry capable of ranged attacks. Now, mounted crossbowmen were quite rare in the last patch, honestly. They did exist, but they were few and far between. Dunland had one, and then anyone who had access to the mercenary crossbowmen had them. But now Rhûn have their own version, the Easterlings Raiders. So, I don't know, mounted crossbows have always struck me as kind of difficult to use, but potentially, in certain situations, the enemy won't have many answers to them, so I'll have to wait and see. Now then, we have Froggy, who has got some Gamp Rim out here in the middle of nowhere, but they're going to be linking up with the rest of his army soon enough, I'm sure. Gamp Rim, got some Flag Rim back here as well, more Scion Rim, another unit of Khamul's Chosen, Balkoth Tribesmen. We're going to look at the Warlords in just a moment, see if they've changed. The Dragon's Breath, Nar Rim, so the walls of this settlement are not going to be surviving too long with this many Dragon's Breath cannons around. Gamp Rim, and then the Dragon's Wrath Warlords, who look the same, but then that's fine because they looked fantastic. Anyway, unit of heavy multiple HP Lancers as they were. We'll see how well they can do in this version of the game now that things have changed around a little bit. And last, but by no means least, we have Khand, who are marching alongside their runic overlords today, played by WK. Khand are a faction which will have probably benefited, you would hope, from any cavalry changes that have happened, and they were already pretty good with their infantry, to be fair. Nurad Footmen have got their arm piercing. We've got some nomadic marauders, obviously. Low-end javelins is something both sides are going to be able to traffic in quite extensively in this battle. Variag bowmen, so they're going to be able to trade blows with the Rhovakin archers. More bowmen, more footmen. We have the Nurad halberds. We've got that weird purple glow in the background which occurs on some maps. We've got some Variag bowmen over here. The Variag cataphracts, which are very, very similar in many ways to the Khamul's Dragon Knights we've already seen. The forces of Rhûn utilise the Hwacha, which is less of a siege weapon built for taking down walls and more one that is going to be able to deal a lot of damage within the city streets. Positioning is going to be everything with the Hwacha. It may end up being completely useless. It may end up being the sort of thing which really tilts the battle in Khan's favour. Variag warriors should do quite nicely against the low-tier tribal units that they're going to be facing off against. Nurad halberds. The Storm Guard, which were fantastic in the last patch, I'm sure that's still going to be the case as well. I mean, mechanically there's not much you can do with units such as that anyway. And then we have some Brotherhood of the Spear also, so a high-end unit of spears. So I don't know how much of a cut there's going to be, probably not all that much given that Kuro's already going to be shooting at the walls with his archers, so there may not be a cut at all, but without further ado, let's get this show on the road. Something about this settlement reminds me a bit of the Grey Havens, actually, with its snaking streets and its mixture of hills and walls as the defences, as the first of the flaming arrows from the Nar Rim start to rain down upon the defenders who are hiding behind the battlements. Indeed, one of the hot ones actually does end up perishing as a result of that volley. Most unfortunate for them, but I think it's actually going to be over here where we see the genuine first action on the field, because there's a lot of cavalry that the defenders have brought, and this does mean that they're going to have to utilise their cavalry effectively if they are to have a chance in this battle moving forward. But they have enough of it to really prove to be a bit of a problem, I would suggest, for all of the attackers over here. Now we may even have to engage in a little bit of half speed at this point, but the Rhovanion nobles thinking about maybe leading the charge into the ranks of Khand. They've got to be very careful though with the Nurad halberds so close by. They are going to charge in. They do manage to hit only the nomadic marauders. Not a huge amount of damage done there, but then the formation is such that you're not going to get a really clean volley off. Over here, meanwhile, there is a unit of the Dragon's Wrath warlords coming forward, but they are all alone, and there's a lot of tribal cavalry. The Tiger Riders are also going to be coming in and causing a few problems for the runic cataphracts, but yeah, we are going to have to go down to half speed here because they aren't moving as a singular group, and I do not have the ability to talk about two things that are happening at once when it comes to cavalry. Variad cataphracts coming in, support from the javelins as well, mind you, so this may look scary for the attackers, but there is a way that they can really make this work for them. Rhovanion nobles, higher tier unit of cavalry, managing to find a gap, managing to do some good damage here to the Nurad footmen, and this will need to continue. The Watcher is actually doing damage to the walls. I don't know whether that's a new feature. I mean, this is going to be something that we're going to be seeing quite a lot in the early period of this game, I think, given the high density of wall-destroying artillery that the attackers would appear to have. Rhovanion lancers coming in, doing some good damage off the charge here to the Nurad footmen, and the less Nurad footmen they have to fight later on, the better. Like I said, all of this armour-piercing line infantry the attackers do have access to will be pretty good against the heavier spears that the Rhovanion are going to need to at least somewhat rely on for their defence. Rhovanion nobles beating the Variad cataphracts for now. More of the walls getting crumbled. We have backed off a little bit from Froggy's advance. Not a huge amount of action happened over here initially. Indeed, looks as though the heavy runic cataphracts over here dealt with the initial charges from the Rhovanion cavalry pretty well, so they've elected instead to focus more of their efforts on the Khandish army. The one-handed falcons of the tribal cavalry now being utilised. This is a bold move though. These spears were in formation largely, so I can't imagine this charge is going to be terribly effective, and indeed many of the riders do end up falling in the face of the Khandish spears. Watcher, some of the Watcher shots actually landing a little bit short and hitting the Khandish infantry, but not too devastating so far. There's still a lot of Rhovanion cavalry out here though. Tundra's Fox will be, you know, Tundra, Eclipse and Sin have all got cavalry out here I believe, but WK will certainly be hoping that Froggy can get his army over here in support of him pretty fast, because getting picked apart with some of the more exposed units, even though the halberds are going to be good against cavalry and melee, they're getting surrounded and charged. Not ideal for them. There's javelins being flung back and forth, tribal cavalry doing their thing. There is a unit way up here as well, so there is a unit of Rhovanion lancers making a nuisance of themselves against the Dragon's Wrath warlords. Still raining fire down upon this wall over here and managing to crumble some of it as well with the Dragon's Breath. A slower approach over here from DF Mark, but then just poking holes in the wall before the inevitable infantry assault, so still nothing too significant happening on that side of the battlefield just yet. It is very much still a matter of how much damage this cavalry is capable of doing. As soon as the charge connects, of course, we have to go away and have a look at a wall crumbling. They did manage to hit the nomadic marauders, and already fairly depleted that they are. Still quite a few halberds though. I mean, there is a lot of death that has occurred over here, but with this amount of cavalry and with how expensive cavalry is, they really do need to do almost crippling damage, I would say, to the Khandish force, seeing as this is the army they have elected to try and focus down. There is a unit of the Carmel's Dragon Knights coming across from DF Mark, so a bit of cavalry support from Rhûn. Tribal Cavalry is getting in the way, but Tribal Cavalry is not going to be enough to defeat one of the stronger units of Knights that the game has to offer. Rhovanion Lancers still loitering around. Brotherhood of the Spear will surely finish off the Tribal Cavalry now. Yeah, they're wavering and they will inevitably rout as well. Rhovanion Nobles may have almost got caught there by the Dragon Knights.
Curses! The enemy are battering down our gates!
Battering rams being sent forward. Somewhere on the field. There are footmen routing at the hands of the cavalry that remains over here. Still charging in, and all of this cavalry so far has proven to be effective, you'd have to say.
The enemy are battering down the gates!
It's only a snapshot, certainly, but stuff like the Rhovanion Lancers, all of this single HP cavalry, has so far proven to be pretty good. And Bowman still trying to do their thing as well. This is a bold move. Again, an isolated unit of halberdiers means you can charge them from two directions and have the desired effect. But the longer you stay in melee with them, the worse it's going to get for you as cavalry. Still the cavalry comes out as well. Tribal cavalry charging in. Not going to be quite as meaty off the charge as the Rhovanion units, but still hitting an exposed unit of Brotherhood of the Shadows. Handish heavy swordsman moving forward still. Brotherhood of the Spear are proving to be a bit of a saving grace for Khan so far. Certainly doing a good job at getting some damage done to the Rhovanion riders. Let's have a look over on the other side of the field now. Carmel's Immortals battering down the gate. Balkoth Tribesmen and the Tribal Skirmishers charging out immediately to go after the Carmel's Immortals. I don't think tribal units are going to do too well against them, but the battle back and forth between javelins, but two lower end javelins, it's really hard to know who's actually going to get the better end of this fight. Tribal units, I mean tribal levy spears charging out of the gates to get in the way, but like I said, I really don't think they're going to do all that well against the Carmel's Immortals. A dual wielding unit should be pretty good against a low tier spear unit such as the tribal levies. Meanwhile, big push into the settlement now, maybe trying to use the narrower choke points of the streets rather than trying to defend three that are in close proximity with one another. Rhovakin phalanx and tribal levy spears, but this is a big assault, and Rhovanion are going to need to get into position with more defensive infantry if they hope to withstand this. Rhovakin archers doing their best, but Rhûn have got their own archers in support, and they've got a lot of this good quality infantry coming forward as well. Flagrim pulling back a little bit. They don't want to rout themselves after all with the approaching reinforcements. They don't want to overextend. They have the momentum, but there's no need to try and force the issue. The Immortals going up against the Levy Spears again. The Hoplons will be a little bit tougher for them to get through, but that's what the Flagrim are for, so a really good combination of units here from Rhûn. Rhovakin archers will be hoping that they can do the sufficient damage to the runic forces. Meanwhile, tribal cavalry getting hit by the Naru. Rhovakin archers will be able to shoot at the Easterlings. I mean, I think this is what they're trying to do, simply try and duke and waste a bit of ammunition with their cavalry. Seeing as how it is very depleted at this point. I mean, there's a scene of carnage over here, many dead cavalrymen and infantry from Khand. Khand already stacking up on the gap in the wall that they have created. Still some defensive infantry waiting for them. So really it's over here now where the action has shifted a little bit. The Rhovanion waiting for DF Mark's attack, but Kuro's the only one who's advanced into the settlement properly at this stage. Defeat is almost a certainty for the Hoplons. Not terribly surprising. Again, that armour piercing is going to be all important against a unit like this, but the addition of the phalanx is going to be the sort of thing which makes the runic progress significantly slower. Rhûn don't have pikes of their own, and while the armour piercing will be good against the phalanx unit, as well if they can get into melee. It's going to be much harder for them to do so if they have to fight through pikes. Come on, shadow bows are over here. You can see that they've lost the clear projectile, so no longer are they body piercing. I believe the idea behind the rangers was to make them significantly higher damage than regular archers. So it still makes them very good at slaying infantry units, really. But no longer will they be destroyers of worlds, and I think perhaps their weakness against heavy archers will be exacerbated by their new position within the meta. Tribal levy slingers almost engaged there by the Carmel's Immortals, but another unit of the Hoplons moving forward to close that avenue of attack off. Archers trading back and forth between the two sides. Fire arrows also being utilised a little bit by the Rhovanion now. Are they going to retreat from these positions? Tribal levy slingers. Very nice, clean shot here into the Gamp Brim. Rhûn will not be a massive fan of losing that many halberds that quickly. Gamp Brim could yet prove to be a very important unit later on in the battle. Khan continuing to push forward, so they have gone through the gap now. Maybe not really prepared for this either. The Rhovanion look as though they were maybe moving a little bit, and the Hoplons getting surrounded rather by a combination of the Watcher crew and Brotherhood of the Spear. Defenders will be glad that the Watcher is out of ammunition at the very least, because it would have been by far more dangerous if the artillery pieces within the walls of the settlement. The Dragon's Breath will be much more difficult to use there. Tribal Berserkers defending the walls, going toe to toe with the Nurad Footmen. The armour piercing from the Nurad Footmen isn't going to be quite so useful against the tribal units, and in return this is probably one of the units the Berserkers will like facing off against the most. Deliver their damage. Brotherhood of the Shadows going up against some Rhovikin archers which have now pulled out their swords. Not many Brotherhood of the Shadows though. Few of them remain. Froggy's army continues to trudge the long path over to the actual settlement. Tribal levy slingers as well. I don't think they actually have the best of shots regardless of what they're going after. Combination of skirmishers and now the phalanx as well. I mean, the skirmishers alone have not been enough to deal with this level of Khandish infantry, so the support of the pikes will be very important if they continue, or if they want to continue to fight over here. Let's see Variad warriors moving in. Are they going to push the siege tower through? Offer a little bit of makeshift cover. I don't know how effective that is. I've seen people do that in Medieval 2 ever since I've been playing it, and it's one of those things where I'm not sure it's really worth the time or the effort to do so, but I mean it's interesting at the very least that the game, there's interesting ways to play the game like that. Always has been. Hoplons moving in, the Rhovanion Lancers, so the cavalry that retreated back inside the settlement still being utilised. The Watcher crew has taken an awful lot of damage. Dull thud of the runic cannons from the distance. Hoplons, it still says defeat seems certain for them, which is kind of surprising. The Dragon's Breath crew, this unit of Flagrim, it says victory seems certain for them as well. I mean, they are outnumbered by all of these tribal units, but I'm not sure. Without any Berserkers present, I don't think the tribal units are the answer to the Flagrim, even if Flagrim themselves will be doing a vastly reduced amount of damage against unarmoured units. Another section of the patchwork walls falls. Rhovikin archers are here. Phalanx, I mean, they have pushed Rhûn back a little bit here, but I think the momentum is shifting back in favour of the Easterlings once more. Phalanx unit getting wrapped around a little bit, which isn't what you want to be seeing if you're the Rhovanion at this point, and with another unit of Scion Rim on the way as well. Probably not going to end all that well for the Rhovanion. Fair amount of carnage has been wrought over here, but I think Rhûn can afford to be pretty pleased with their day's work over here so far. 2 units of shadow bows. Another sign that the Rangers have changed in terms of their focus as well. There's no way that you'd be able to afford 2 Rangers as the attackers unless you were going to really compromise on the size of your army in the previous patch. comes the cavalry. They do have a bit of an opening here, the cavalry, that they could use, but I don't know necessarily. DF Mark's army moving forward. The next defensive position has already been set up by the Rhovanion. Yeah, they're going to be back. I was going to say a single line of tribal levy skirmishes isn't really going to do much against Rhûn, but they will if they have the backup of the heavier units, more of the sacrificial lambs on the front line. Still got the option of the ballista as well, the hussar statue in the middle of the settlement. Very resplendent. Khan still moving forward, getting in the way. I think, like I said, the siege tower, I think it's getting in the way more of Khan actually in getting a united front against all of these Rhovanion units, but we have warriors struggling a little bit here. Khan, of course, took by far the most damage in the initial cavalry phase of the battle among all the attackers, so it's not going to be too surprising to see them start to falter the first among all of the invading forces here today. Tribal levy slingers. Looks like the Rhovanians still have things under control over here for the time being. Khan don't have the manpower really to be attacking on multiple fronts to the extent that the others do now. Brotherhood of the Spear trying to push through this defensive line. As the flames smoulder away on the walls. His army is here now, trying to shoot in through the gap a little bit. And they will get some kills on the tribal levy spears, but I think Khan would probably much prefer Rhûn to be taking a bit more of an active role in this. Tribal levy slingers up here on the walls. Rhôn Lancers taking hits from the Nar Rim as well. So far, I don't think the defenders will be too disappointed with how it's gone against Khandian and Rhûn on that side. Rhûn have been a little slow. Khan have been punished by the cavalry already. Tribal Berserkers' victory seems certain for them. A lot of the outer defence is starting to look a little bit compromised though, so the pace of Rhûn's assault over on the other side may yet prove to be a very good thing. Rhovanion nobles moving in support of the tribal berserkers. It says victory seems certain for them, so it's a sign that the berserkers are trading quite nicely with the local units that the Easterlings have at their disposal. Camels and Mortals moving in, the crossbows, both mounted and dismounted in place now, to offer a little bit of support. Camels and Mortals moving forward to try and prevent any reinforcements from supporting this flagging front line now. Defeat seems certain for them, but that's not too surprising. They're extending themselves through quite a lot. Rhovanion nobles taking hits from the crossbows, but between them and the berserkers, they are going to prove to be more than a match for the Easterling infantry that's over here. Rhûn, meanwhile, have managed to get through this defensive position over here as well. Excuse me. Yeah, I mean, they are exposed. I mean, Rhûn are going to be able to get in behind all of these units. They're going to need to turn around with this unit of berserkers, I think. There's another secondary line that has been put over here. I mean, they could go through this wall if they still have the artillery ammunition. That would be another way up. But other than that, they will have to attack purely from the front. I think this is the only gate. So yeah, they're going to need to use their siege towers, I think, in the second layer. The Rhovanion, at this point, I think, should be looking at retreating to the second layer, if I'm being honest. Rhovanion archers, slingers, once again doing a real number on the Gap Rim, and on the Minaret halberds. So all of the attacking halberds have been introduced to the business end of these tribal Rhovanion skirmishes so far. This unit of tribal levy slingers trying to get as many volleys off into the halberds as they can before they are inevitably routed by the flag rim that are clobbering them in the back. Still quite a few dead tribal units over here. Rhovanion no rush and still continuing to whittle down the tribal units that are over here. Although Scion Rim just spontaneously combusted from something, I'd assume it's the arrow towers. And the crossbows continuing to push forward. Still the Rhovakin nobles hold their ground alongside the berserkers, and they are actually winning out against the Easterling infantry here. The Flagrim's armour piercing and the Carmel's Immortals numbers not enough to secure victory. Tribal levy skirmishers also having their part to play. Shooting into the tribal berserkers. Some of those projectiles will connect, and they only need some of them to connect actually, given the position that Rhûn now occupy, although these units that are going up against the tribal berserkers, Rim in melee are probably not going to be the answer to them. Tribal levy skirmishers out of ammunition perhaps, so they're just going to be committed to melee to try and help hold on to the front line for as long as possible. And continuing to move forward, so yeah, the siege towers are being pushed into position, and that's a good thing. You want to be pressurising every angle that you can. They can take this road over here, but when it gets to the final stand, there is only one pathway up, which makes sense. The final stand needs to be among the most defensive positions that the defenders can occupy. Froggy is now moving forward with his infantry, and as a result, I think the Rhovanion are finally going to be forced back from this area. Tribal levy skirmishers still doing what damage they can before they're inevitably routed. Remains of these units over here, I don't know. Can look to be extremely damaged at this point. There is still a battle going on over here, but you can tell that Khand are on their last legs because it's Rhûn that have actually taken up the mantle of continuing this assault over here. The Gambrim will do quite nicely against the Hoplons though. Tribal levy skirmishers on the way forwards. It's a big area to try and cover this central square around the great statue. They still have outer defences as well. I mean, this is a 4v4, so the defenders do have a little bit more margin for error than they would under normal circumstances. Only 19 Rhovakin nobles remain. They are a little bit scattered in terms of their positioning as well. The berserkers have held up pretty well in a elongated fight like this though. You know, Scion Rim moving forward to the heavy runic spears. Rhûn aren't going anywhere anytime soon, and you have to think eventually this pressure is going to tell. 25 levy skirmishers not going to be the answer in the long run. Scion Rim actually are shaken. Maybe a charge from the Tiger Riders would be the thing to rout them off. This front line's still holding up pretty well as well. Kuro not wanting to commit anything too serious over here, instead focusing on putting the siege towers on the inner wall. They proved to be a bit of an error. Trying to go after DF Mark's position first. I mean, he does have some support over here, but how quickly can they deal with the Rhovanion units here? There's no doubt Rhûn will clean up this pocket of resistance, but it's all about how efficiently they can do so at this point, as the Rhovanion continue to reorganise in front of the inner wall. Getting a little bit of friendly fire there actually, the Narim, to the backs of their own fighters. The Rhovakin Hoplons from the front should be fairly resilient against arrow fire, shielded and more heavily armoured than the other units the Rhovanion have. Again, the bellow of the cannons in the distance. Now Rim moving forward with some more support from Khan, what little of that remains. There's some of the runic cavalry that still stands also. Storm Guard setting up another defensive position over here. It's been a very layered defence this from the Rhovanion, but in a pretty effective way. Many of the front lines have been acting kind of like ablative armour. they're always going to lose, but the damage they're doing to the attackers as they move forwards, maybe with one eye on the final stand, where the attackers will have to try and force their way through a singular choke point. Perhaps that is the play. There are halberds on the way forward. Tribal levy spears now retreat. Going to retreat to go around the gatehouse. They're going to have to do so around the outer positions as well. It's an even fight so far. Scion Room against the Hoplons. I mean, I'd assume the Scion Room, based on the fact they are an upper-end unit of spears, are probably going to have the better of that fight 1v1 in a vacuum. And Rhûn also have far more in the way of support, ready to be committed forward. There are reinforcements ready for the Rhovanion as well, but they've got to be very careful with the Rhovanion. They can't afford to overcommit into one area, because otherwise the domino effect will come into place all the harder when one of their defensive positions falls and the others get systematically surrounded. Dragon Knights doing their thing. There's still resistance being put up over here though by the Rhovanion. Still the Rhovakin nobles fight. Only 5 remain. Tribal levy skirmishes defeats distinct possibility. Are we seeing an engagement up on the walls? I'm a little bit surprised actually that Rhûn have managed to do this amount of damage this quickly. In fact, Rhovakin phalanx should do very nicely against the Carmel shadow bows, to be honest with you. Pikes on a wall, when they get into a formation like this, can actually be a real nightmare to have to deal with. You'd think a pike would be a terrible weapon to have on a wall, but in the Medieval 2 mechanics, they actually can be very, very useful. Rhûn trying to get down over here, but they're immediately being mobbed now, which is a bit of a problem. I mean, the Sapphire Blazemen here, who are a very dangerous unit, but there's a lot of tribal berserkers. There's also another unit of Rhovakin nobles, so very keen on not allowing Rhûn to get away with any more than they already have done over here. And they are now struggling a little bit. Reinforcements are ready, including the Carmel's Chosen. The rest of Kuro's army down here, still trying to finish off a few tribal units that still roam the streets. Progress is being made, but the defensive lines have been constructed. Rhovakin Ballista, or Rhovanion Ballista I should say, going after the Scion Room there, Easterlong Crossbowman and Scion Ring. It's been a real fixture of this battle so far, having out-of-ammunition skirmishers act as the cannon fodder in and around better units. It's a tried and tested thing to do. It's been something we've seen in nearly every melee engagement so far. It's past the halfway point in this battle, and the urban section really of the city, residential areas, mostly have fallen to the attackers at this point. As the pikes continue to hold the line over here, so Rhûn will need to, you can see over in the background there, Dragon's Wrath Crossbowmen trying to be the ones to offer support to the front line, and that will do good damage here to the heavier Rhovanion units. Froggy's Scion Rim moving in. They'll be just fine against tribal levy skirmishers, but it's the pikes they need to worry about. Relatively thin line of pikes though, which is perhaps why the defenders are scrambling to get some hoplons to solidify the front line. But very little remains of Khand is also still roaming around, ready to be committed forward as well. I wonder if the Rhovanion capital actually has a name in the lore. I mean, I guess they're a little bit more disparate. Probably not. It probably is. They're probably mentioned offhandedly in a similar manner to how Rhôvanion are mentioned. These berserkers are actually doing a remarkably good job against the Scion Rim, to be honest. Perhaps it's not too surprising that an aggressive unit like that is doing well against an almost entirely defensive unit like the Scion Rim, but considering the numbers are what they are, I can't help but think the tooltip is being a bit optimistic to think the berserkers are going to win that fight. Meanwhile, they have managed to force Rhûn back here, and it looks like Kuro's assault was maybe a little bit premature. Support from the archers as well. Scion Rim are tough, but they're not this tough. And hopefully Kuro still has a few units left so that he can attempt this again when the assault is underway from the front, otherwise this really was all for naught. Tribal levy slingers. How much ammunition do they still have left, I wonder? They are actually attacking this section of the city as well, getting in through this gap, Froggy. Again, maybe the case can be made that it's a little bit disparate, the assault. Kuro attacking a little bit sooner than everyone else. Froggy now getting involved before the gate itself is actually under direct assault, because there's still defenders out in the square blocking any further progress from Rhûn. Over there, Balkoth tribesmen so far. Once again, the Berserkers really proving their worth here. Archers continuing to fire. I mean, they are pulling back now. I mean, this is something which the attackers will be quite pleased with. Plenty of routing going on, the Dragon's Wrath crossbows, and now the Dragon Knights, as well as a lot of Easterling infantry doing the business, and the Rhovanion now trying to retreat back behind their gates. Slingers ready. Have also decided to save a bit of their ammunition now. Are the Eastlings going to be able to get some units through this gate? Possibly, but I think it'll be slammed shut behind them, so I'm not sure if it's actually something that would be desirable. Strong crossbowman. And Scion Rim leading the way. Still have a bit of ammunition in that artillery. It could make this section of the battlefield significantly easier for them to navigate. They need to be careful not to fall back completely here. They've still got too many defenders over there trying to face off against Froggy to just abandon the gate like this. So they are going to have to turn around and maybe do something about that. And they do have an opportunity as well to surround and destroy these Easterlings that have decided to charge in through the gate. Another wave of Easterlings from Kuro. A significant one as well, because the Carmel's chosen are moving forward, and this Rhovakin phalanx is surrounded. These Berserkers will finish off what remains of the flag rim, but the Rhovanion pikes demolished. And how things quickly turn around. This wave has yielded the results that Kuro would have wanted. Again, they can't really do much with this road over here though, other than simply join up with the assault, which is already now well and truly underway. Over here, the runic mounted crossbows and knights making a nuisance of themselves, but the knights struggling a little bit more so, getting caught up on all of these pikemen. That gate is not going to be closed though, so they haven't needed to use the ram in the end. Meanwhile, Rhovanion having a pretty good time of it over here, you'd have to say. Telltale whistle of crossbows. Once again, the Dragon's Wrath crossbows, they were used to very good effect out in the square near the statue. And once again, they will prove to be devastating to the Rhovanion if they stay in their current position. There is another route up to the... Okay, yeah. So there are two pathways into the town centre, which is for the best. I mean, you don't want... Generally speaking, battles that resolve themselves into one choke point tend to be quite boring in the end. Two is much better. Although it's also going to be more difficult for the Rhovanion as the battle wears on. Hot ones and more of the nobles now getting into place. Armour piercing will be useful against both of them, but in terms of sheer quality, the flag rim that have been committed through the gap in the wall may still struggle. Very nice position as well for the tribal levy slingers, able to shoot directly down into the Easterling attackers, which is why I was surprised when it looked as though the Rhovanion are actually pulling back completely from this position. They've got a golden opportunity now to use what throwing projectiles they still have left, as well as their ballista. And this could end up being very, very painful for the Easterlings indeed. Still a decent amount of defenders remaining, but then there's a decent amount of the actual battle still to go as well. Comes chosen still. I mean, this is probably the unit I've been most impressed by, honestly, the tribal berserkers. They've really done a good job. I mean, it's entirely possible that they're intended to fill a role kind of similar to like the Black Wolves do in Rhûn. And if that's the case, that would certainly explain how effective they've been in this battle so far. Running through many Easterlings. Further up. Still plenty of reinforcements for the attackers to commit forwards as well, but this initial assault through the gatehouse has been turned back pretty quickly. It's a lot of manpower that the attackers have just lost.
Fight on. They must get no further.
The settlement is certainly looking a little bit worse for wear now. If this is a regular occurrence, that might go to explain the varying colours of the brickwork.
Without him, his troops will lose their will to fight.
Interesting bug, that. I think I've seen it before.
Only half the enemy force remains.
Dragons Wrath Guildsmen moving forward. What remains of the Nurad Storm Guard as well. Some of the tribal levies being committed forward to try and keep control of the situation. Forward come yet another unit of Flag Rim. Over here, the Rhovikin nobles continue to slowly mulch their way through the unit that was committed previously. Still some slingers. Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen getting up onto the walls now. With their own throwing projectiles, they'll be useful at trying to whittle down something like the nobles. Forward come the Carmel's Chosen as well from Froggy, so eager to finally make some progress over here, and it looks as though they are trying to pull back a little bit now, perhaps preparing for the fact that Kuro would have attacked them from the side and the back. They've decided to retreat to the hill now. Another unit of Gamprim coming forward, but a little bit scattered, a little bit disparate. Maybe another opportunity for the Rhovanion to do some good damage to a polearm unit. Still has some crossbows as well. Crossbows could prove to be a very important tool in the late game here for the attackers. Still quite a few of them as well. I mean, still a decent amount of manpower for both sides, really. Still the berserkers continue to hold on. More damage being done. Flaming shot could be the answer. Victory seems certain for the Rhovikin archers, which is surprising. That has to be a result of ranged support which is being rendered. Otherwise I'd imagine the halberds would be ideally suited for bringing down a unit of archers like that. I don't know what the Dragon's Breath is firing at necessarily, but still. The very limited presence Khan still has on the field is also being put to use. There's one of the defending generals. There's a lot of javelins being used there. Going after the Dragon's Wrath crossbows, which they need to. They can't allow the Dragon's Wrath crossbows free reign, even without their body piercing as they are. They're still a very dangerous unit of crossbows. Carmel's Chosen now leading the way against this Rhovanion defence in this very narrow choke point, you have to say, but combination of Hoplons and Nobles. Not any really high damage units on this front line from the Rhovanion, at least in class. I mean, the Rhovikin nobles are going to be plenty damaging enough, but they're more of a defensive bodyguard unit, as any sword and shield bodyguard unit is going to be. But it is going to be up to the slingers to do the damage, having to bank their shots a little bit, but most of those are hitting, finding their intended targets. Reinforcements being committed forward. Rhovikin phalanx getting hit as well now by throwing projectiles. Balkoth tribesmen. Still the small matter of those Dragon's Wrath crossbows, who are They're not being hit anymore, but they themselves are not firing either. Victory seems certain, only a fool could lose this battle. Flicking over to defeat pretty quickly as soon as the pikes get involved, and some Rhovikin archers also there to try and help prop things up. One's still there. Tribal levy slingers on their way forwards. Ballista crew probably out of ammunition now, I would suggest, although I don't know. They are still... I think they've abandoned it, otherwise they would have units either side, so that's a sign maybe that they have run out of ammunition, and maybe they're just hoping that it can act as a lightning rod for any projectiles that are still in the attacker's possession. Victory seems certain, only a fool could lose this battle. Slowly but surely pushing the defenders back, the Carmel's chosen at the centre of this effort, and tribal levy slingers alone, I fear, are not going to be good enough to hold back the tide for too much longer. General, is it? Shadow bows. Again, the losing of attacking generals does have a tendency to be more significant because the routing from attackers tends to be more devastating, but I mean this is a proper settlement as well. It does have a town centre, so even if you do manage to rout the defenders, in theory they'll come back. The perpetual routing bug is ever present, so we are getting towards the final 10k frames now, and that does mean, well, there's a tendency to mean the final stage of the battle, and that is going to be the case here as well. There's nowhere left for the Rhovanion to retreat to after this. Tribal levy slingers. Again, I don't know if more tribal levy slingers are necessarily the answer here. Only 13 Carmels chosen remain though. So the battle fatigue might be starting to set in a little bit here. And indeed, I think actually through sheer numbers, these tribal units may actually prove to be victorious if Rhûn do not commit any more reinforcements forward. Dragon's Wrath crossbowmen are a good thing to have in the back pocket though. Even if they're out of ammunition, their melee capabilities are still nothing to be sniffed at. I don't think there's anything left over here, so we're starting to see really the attackers also start to exhaust their manpower a little bit. These really are the only reinforcements that remain to them that weren't directly involved. Carmel's Chosen, Shadow Guard, Guildsmen, Flagrim, all good units, very useful for the late game, but not many of them remain. So it's not going to be a case of simply overwhelming the Rhovanion. It's going to be a little bit more to it than that. Rhovikin nobles facing off against the Scion Rhûn now. Tribal levy slingers, victory is a distinct possibility. I don't know if the Dragon Knights, I mean the Dragon Knights don't really have the room to be as effective as they would like to be, I'm sure, especially not when there's cavalry from the defenders which can also be utilised to really get in the way. And already it's very clear that this isn't going to be a fight that's decided by the cavalry. If the cavalry has any part to play, I'd imagine it would just be as a finishing move more so than something which actively turns the tide. And the Rhovanion now throwing all their units into a combined front line. Once again, the tribal berserkers carving through the initial runic infantry that were over here. The Dragon's Breath crew not quite up to the task, and they will be finished off by Hoplons and Rhovikin phalanx follow through. Gamper. I mean, the Carmel's Chosen are going to be a trickier customer for all of the Rhovanion units to have to try and deal with, but they are a little bit isolated here, and the high damage of the Berserkers combined with the pinning effect of the Phalanx may prove to be a big difference maker here. Tribal Levy Slingers still there. I mean, they've committed pretty much all of their strong infantry to this frontal defence at this point in the Rhovanion, so they've played their hand. Time will tell whether it proves to be a good move. Dragon's Wrath crossbows ready to shoot point blank into the Tribal Levy Slingers. You may think it's not the best of units to be going after, but these are the only units which are defending this position at this stage, so if you can get rid of them, you can start attacking from the side. This defence over here. Victory is almost a certainty. Rhûn are going to need to get those reinforcements they had a little bit further back into the fray at this point, because I think the Rhovanion actually had the more decisive move there. Rhûn a little bit more stretched, the Rhovanion lurched forward, and the initial battle has gone in their favour. Even if the Rhovanion end up losing from this point, I don't think there's much they could have done here in the late game at the very least to have reversed their fortunes, but I think it still says that the attackers are in the ascendancy, but multiple HP units such as the Carmel's Chosen, I would assume they're still multiple HP, have a tendency to skew the chances of victory pretty significantly. Some Rhovanion nobles. I mean, cavalry for the defenders could still prove to be very, very important, actually. What I'm really looking at, though, are those Rhovakin phalanxes. Unless Rhûn have got the projectiles to deal with them, I'm not sure whether they're going to be able to pull through here. And this is also where the shields on the phalanx could prove to be absolutely vital. Unit of Rhovakin nobles here from the side. They're just going to shoot point blank into them with the archers? I guess so. Surprised those nobles haven't been committed forwards, actually. It's kind of an all-in kind of situation at this stage. Defeat seems certain, eh? And they really are pushing back against the Easterlings now. This one unit of Tribal Levy skirmishers is maybe the slight chink in the armour. Because they could crush through them and then attack the Rhovanion from behind, but I don't know, I think the window for that may very well be closing.
Our ally lies dead. Without their general, they may lose heart and flee.
There goes a Rhovanion general. There's a good point though, what is happening over here? This flanking move. Can Rhûn make this work for them? They're still having to mulch their way through Tribal Levy Slingers who are still holding on. Surely they will fall away eventually. Another unit of 100 slingers though. These units just intended to slow any flanking move down. The nobles pulling back a little bit perhaps. Yeah, I mean, they don't want to push too far down the hill, otherwise they'll find themselves fully in the crosshairs of the bank of crossbowmen that the Easterlings have set up. Can they actually get out of range though? They can reposition themselves so that the crossbows can't hit them somehow, I'm sure, and they do need to do that because that is the way in which Rhûn could still go on to claim victory in this fight. Carmel's Chosen, still 78 of them, making a nuisance of themselves. Rhovakin nobles, berserkers though. Really good combination of high quality units. Is this the... I assume this is the general model, the guy on foot with the wings as well. He seems certain. Which is somewhat surprising, I have to say, but it must be the presence of the Carmel's Chosen. Flag rim on the way forwards as well, so Rhûn... It's a very finely balanced thing, this. Tribal Levy Slingers pulling back. Rhûn charging up the hill. The presence of the guildsmen over here has maybe convinced the Rhovanion that they couldn't afford to simply hold position there either. They can't allow Rhûn's skirmishers to get any sort of value off really, otherwise that's pretty much game set match for the attackers. Defeat seems certain for the guildsmen, going up against the nobles as they are. Not many reinforcements in behind, the crossbows, but the time may come where the crossbows have to be used as infantry, to be honest, because they're trying to act in support of their infantry, but there isn't much of their infantry left to them. I really do like the new model for the Carmel's chosen, honestly.
Our foolish general has thrown his life away.
The changes are not sweeping, but they're enough to really make the unit, I think. Levy slingers still bumbling around. Do they have any projectiles? Doesn't look like it, which again may prove to be the problem. They've got no choice really but to go directly into the phalanx. There is also a somewhat battered unit of Rhovikin nobles offering support to them. No, they still have some projectiles. That may prove to be the difference maker. Yeah, they're going to have to move forwards. Not ideal for the Rhovanion, but they didn't have a choice. They can't just sit there and allow themselves to be shot. They may as well engage and see if their unit is made of the right stuff to give them victory.
Our men have slain the enemy general. Without him, his troops will lose their will to fight.
Victory seems certain still for the tribal berserkers. Doing a really good job here against a unit as strong as the Carmel's chosen. But I can't help but notice that the Rhovanion are running ever lower on units that they can actually commit into the fight. Also those Dragon's Wrath guildsmen, really good volleys here into the berserkers, and that may prove to be very key. Rhovirum nobles doing their best to try and salvage the situation. Slingers doing their thing. A combination of the cavalry and the slingers should be enough to bring the guildsmen down, but they've already done a decent amount of damage there. All those units which are perpetually routing in the town centre. The phalanx unit actually going to be victorious against the crossbows, but the nobles pretty far into the enemy ranks. They're going to get. There's not enough of them at this point to be able to deal with this many Dragon's Wrath guildsmen. All they can hope to do is cling on.
Defeat seems almost certain.
And we are getting to the business end of the situation now. The attackers leading by 1%, and that 1% is going to be very, very difficult for the defenders to make up from here, I would suggest. They've still got, Dragon's Wrath crossbows, 85 of them still strong in melee. These strong crossbows, if they still have any ammunition at all, even if the Rhovanion can dig out a result in melee, one volley will probably be enough to finish off all that remains. Further back. Circumventing the phalanx. Tribal levy slingers going back into the town centre, maybe hoping that if they can engage them in melee, all of these units which are perpetually routing will come back, but even with them, they're very scattered and most of them are tribal, like very entry-level tribal units, so I don't think that would be enough to make a difference either at this juncture. Crossbows, they still have those slingers, still doing what damage they can. Is a distinct possibility. 2 Rhovikin nobles remain over here. Crossbows moving forward. This is everything. Pretty much, well, all of the units are now within camera shot, or a little bit over the hill as well. Very finely contested game, this. There's still a fair amount left as well, which is somewhat confusing, as the Easterlings are now within the town centre itself as well. Final victory is theirs over here. There's 2 Rhovican nobles. Maybe that's going to be the thing which takes a little bit more time. Victory almost a certainty. Just a matter of finishing off the tribal units at this point. Rhûn, I mean, they don't have that much, so it's going to take a little bit of time, I suppose. Some of these units actually have returned from routing now, so the Easterlings will need to slay the men of the Rhovanion to the last man. They will be able to do that, but that would explain the extra frames required. It's a very odd bug, that. I don't know if there's any fixing it though, because I think it is fundamental to Medieval 2. There are some things that you simply cannot change without using a cracked copy that will then no longer work on Steam. 74 E-strong crossbows, 29 flag rim. Yeah, all in all, be around 100 men, maybe a little more, that the Easterlings are going to be victorious with in this battle. There's not really much left to say, really. It's a longer clean-up section of the battle than I was expecting, to be fair, but I guess that's testament to the fact that the Rhovican units actually are decent when it comes to their defensive values, so having the desired effect. You don't say. 3% the difference in the end, yeah, it's not surprising, like there wasn't really much that Rhovanion had done. I do think that the aggressive action they took here in the late game was the only thing they could have done, and it at least put a little bit more pressure upon the attackers to perform, but they did, so it's one of those situations where there are so many factors at play that it's kind of hard to tell what the defenders could have done differently. The defenders performed pretty well on most front lines, but maybe their defence was just a little bit too layered, a few too many of them crumbling away. A lot of cavalry as well. You need to get a ton of value off of cavalry like that if you're going to win a battle when bringing that much, and it did better than it would have done in the last patch, I would suggest, but there is still a matter of you need to be almost faultless with cavalry if you bring that many as the defenders, and the attackers were able to do enough damage to it in parts that wasn't enough. Like I said, they needed to completely cripple Khand, and the fact that Khand was still able to be a significant player, especially in the initial assault through the walls, was maybe a sign that the cavalry hadn't done all that it could have. There's still some of them alive, is pretty crazy, but there you go. And the Rhovanion falls. Their debut may have ended in defeat, but even so. Nice to see them in the game at long last. I've known about their existence for quite a while, but it was just a case of waiting to see how they would develop, and finally here we are. So, you know, again, decent kill spread. WK getting the least, but that's not too surprising given the savaging he took at the hands of the cavalry, really. And the most kills going to Tundra's Fox, again, for probably fairly similar reasons. But let's see what did the damage for the Rhovanion, see what was effective. The Rhovican nobles, we saw them holding many of the front lines in this battle and doing so very effectively. One of the more defensive units that they have at their disposal, but still very strong. The varying throwing projectiles we saw from the Rhovanion also effective. Skirmishers, slingers, very nice. The tribal berserkers, honestly, were the unit which, from a cursory glance, probably impressed me the most, to be honest. Plenty of damage that they were dealing, even in situations where they looked, well, you'd imagine they wouldn't really be gaining the upper hand. They actually were doing very nicely. So that is very good to see. Rhovanion Lancers 161, which is nice. Tribal Cavalry even doing quite well. Also add in men's army, 337 on Tribal Berserkers, 271, so yeah, very good performers in this situation. Phalanxes, the Hoplons, more defensive units, so kill counts is not really the best way to really judge them. 100 kills on Rhovican Nobles, maybe a little bit more disappointing for a bodyguard unit there, but 283 is much more like it. From Sin, several of his skirmishers also breaking the 200 mark, his berserkers also just about doing the same, and Tundra's Fox, many of his units breaking 100 kills, 413 and 374 on tribal berserkers. So yeah, I feel vindicated in the fact that they were the unit that impressed me the most from the defenders today. But yeah, I mean, stylistically, I think the Rhovanion units, especially the high-end ones, are the ones that really catch the eye for the Rhovanion. But functionally, in this battle at the very least, it was the tribal units, I think, which actually performed slightly better for them. But maybe that's just a case of it being this particular matchup against Easterlings and men of the Far East as well. So, irregardless, big thank you to Sin of the Dark Cloud for sending me this battle replay and allowing me to showcase the new patch. I think it was actually intended that I would do this a couple of weeks ago, but I was away for work, so I wasn't able to do so. But better late than never. And also work on the new patch is still ongoing, so it's not as if this was intended to be like a big release event or anything. This is more just a preview for what is to come, and plenty to unpack from that as well. And it also means that with the new patch rumbling ever closer, I can start to make plans for stuff to do when it actually does release as well, and the sooner the better on that count as well. As for what's going to be coming up soon, we will be still seeing stuff from the old patch as well. Of course, I've still got plenty of replays to be getting through, plenty of stuff that Winged Swordsman sent me while I was away for work, so going to be chugging my way through all of those replays as well. I want to be making my way through that backlog, and now that I've got a little bit of time off as well, hopefully I can record in bulk and really get myself back into having a little bit of room to spare as well, purely because at this point the replay that I'm recording is the very next one to come out. So just for reference, this one's coming out on the Wednesday, I'm recording it on the Sunday. Yeah, it is what it is. Usually I have a little bit more of a stockpile of replays than that, but that's the situation that work does tend to put me in, and I've managed to maintain my schedule up to now, and hopefully I will continue to do so. And we march ever onwards towards the rather, the interesting end to the year, I would suggest. I've already mentioned this several times before, so I won't go through it again, but it's going to be good for the channel either way, I think. But yeah, so thank you to Sin of the Dark Cloud. Big thank you to all of the players as well for being a part of this battle replay and for being a part of the testing for the new patch. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.